Welcome to the third episode of Clinically Correlate with Azfar and Vedant. In this episode, we have our very good friend and fellow R1, Jose, where he will share his amazing journey as an IMG from Honduras, how he got into radiology, how he got into radiology residency at Penn, and his advice to future IMGs who are applying to diagnostic radiology. So Jose, tell us about yourself.
Sure. I was born and raised in Honduras. I also completed my medical school back home. I know how to speak English fluently because in Honduras, some of us go to bilingual schools, and I was in a bilingual school since elementary grade, basically.
And what kind of got you into medicine?
Well, actually, I had some kind of epileptic transient disorder of childhood when I was 7 or 8, and my pediatric neurologist was awesome, and I was like, I want to be like him when I grow up.
Right. So that's what got you into medicine.
Yeah.
And then obviously you're not a pediatric neurologist now.
Of course.
Unless you have ulterior motives. I don't know, man. So what got you into radiology?
So as I went by all my clerkships, I realized I did not want to become a neurologist or a pediatrician. But so as most of us, I guess, when we do our clerkship, we were like, I want to do this, I want to do that. Radiology caught my attention, and I really like a lot of stuff about radiology, how it's so interdisciplinary, how you get to nail diagnosis and tell them, oh, it's this, it's that, with objective data, and that sort of stuff.
So it's kind of a process of elimination going through all your clerkships.
Yeah.
Now, in Honduras, or let's just say in America, we have to do an undergraduate bachelor's degree for 3 to 4 years and then go into medical school. Do people in Honduras go straight from from high school to medical school? What is the transition like?
Yeah, it's very different from here. Our medical school in total, it's 8 years, but they basically bind together the undergrad with the medical school. So it's 7 years of medical school. You do 2 years undergrad, then you start medical school for 4 years pretty much. Then you have to do 1 year of internship where you basically do 3 months of OBGYN, 3 months of IM, 3 months of general surgery, 3 months of pediatrics as an intern. And then as a way to get back to the country, you have to do something called social work, where you basically practice like a general practitioner, either in primary care setting or as a hospitalist.
Now that is after medical school.
Yeah, after medical. You don't get your medical diploma until you complete. It's like a governmental requirement. You cannot graduate as a doctor.
Sort of a mini residency is built into the medical education itself.
Yeah, sort of like what I did for my preliminary IM year. Yeah. Sort of like the last year of medical school. I would say it's like a TY. Yeah. Because you get a little bit of everything.
Got it. And so when did you decide to apply to U.S. programs, and what drew you to U.S. programs?
So I knew I did not want to do my radiology residency in Honduras just because, for example, the volumes of MRs or nukes are not high, or nukes is non-existent in Honduras, basically. And I knew that radiology residency back home wouldn't be the best. And so I figured I wanted to get out there, and I was very familiar with American culture. I had a lot of American friends. I spoke English relatively fluently, so I decided, maybe I should give you as a try. Although I also have family in Spain, so I struggle with the idea of going to Spain. But ultimately, I decided U.S. would be the best.
Yeah, I think and tell us about that transition. When you were thinking about programs in the U.S., tell us about when you left Honduras. What did you do first in the U.S. and how did you build that connection?
Sure. So for us, it's a little bit different. I know that you guys during medical school have to complete your USMLEs in order to move forward to next year, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, for us, it's not a requirement, and nobody expects you to do USMLEs because we have our own standardized tests during medical school that are tailored to a Honduran medical practice. So most of us, I'm not going to say all of us, because some people know before graduating that they want to come here. So they do clerkships even here as a medical student, but most of us IMGs tend to realize that we want to come here after graduating. So we start studying for USMLE after we graduate, and it's like restarting all over. So it's like it takes you a while after you graduate to study for USMLE. And because recruitment committees don't know much about our medical schools, they expect us to do well on the USMLEs. So we have that pressure to score high. Although some programs nowadays are just like double blinding recruiters to avoid that bias. That's how it has been throughout the years. At least that's what we perceived as IMG. So most of us takes a couple of months, years to complete the steps.
Got it.
So it took me like 1 year to complete the steps. Meanwhile, I was doing that. I was working back home as a general practitioner. And then I realized that I wanted to have like a very complete application, because that's the other thing. You come and you practice in a completely different country, and people are going to be, how is he going to practice here? It's completely different. So you need to have some experience here. So I got rotations here. I also did research. It's not per se a requirement, but it's expected. And if you're applying to a competitive specialty like radiology, and as an IMG, you want to have like the complete application. And I also got involved in diversity, radiology committees, research, global health. Just try to find extracurricular interests that are gonna tell the programs that you wanna give back to the specialty. You wanna be more than just a radiologist. You wanna change radiology, and I think most IMGs that I know that have matched into radiology go that extra length and do everything they can in order to have a very complete application.
So let's break that down a little bit more, right? So you mentioned research, you mentioned observerships, you mentioned certain committees, and you mentioned your involvement with global health, right?
Yeah.
How did you make those connections in the United States? Like, did you have mentors in Honduras who connected you with physicians they knew here? How did you make these specific connections here?
So actually, when I was gonna apply here, I thought radiology would be impossible as an IMG. I was going to apply to IM, and then one of my friends who matched into IM and had met through friends of hers in Wisconsin, in the University of Wisconsin, she met a radiologist who is from Venezuela. And she coupled us up, and she became my mentor. And she gave me she strived me you can do it, Jose. You're awesome. She told me you're awesome, and she guided me throughout the process. She connected me with people, and that was really what got me into here. And I also started to look for people that was into research and connected with them, reached out actively. In an area of interest that I was interested in. That's actually how I met one of our attendings here, and we started doing research just because I reached out to him.
Got it. So through a connection that you had at home, you reached out to one attending, and then you started working with that attending, I'm assuming in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And then you reached out to more folks.
Yeah.
And you kind of started spreading your own network while kind of working with multiple people.
So jumping in, could you tell us a little bit more about your research that you did with the folks in Wisconsin and the stuff I think you were doing in your intern year as well?
Sure. So in Wisconsin, I actually did not do research. She just mentored me throughout the whole process. With one of the attendings here, we did a lot of research involving cardiac sarcoid, which is the area of expertise. He's really expert on cardiac sarcoid. So we basically try to see associations on MR signals in patients receiving steroid treatment, or FDG uptake in patients with cardiac sarcoid, and so make association with the different variables, in terms of treatment or characteristics, or basically that sort of stuff. And I also connected with an attending from a big university in New York, and we did a cost-effective analysis on radiation treatment planning with dot-tape PET imaging for atypical meningiomas with And I think she also became like a huge mentor to me, and she helped me a lot. So one of the things I want to convey to anyone who's an IMG and it's gonna apply in the future to radiology is that having a mentor who knows how the process works helps a lot.
How about rotations? Did you do rotations anywhere? Like, what was that experience like for you?
So yeah, pretty much like anywhere I could find, just because I applied like during the pandemic, like right before the pandemic, so rotations weren't that easy to get. I
Right.
guess you guys also experienced a similar thing. So I did it wherever I got the opportunity. I did it in Houston, Chicago, New York.
And you mentioned two other experiences. You were in a lot of diversity in radiology committee as well as your passion for global health.
Yeah.
How did you sort of get involved, and to what extent did you get involved?
In global health, I was with a nonprofit that basically tries to get top-notch radiology education from the US and make it available to anywhere in the world. It's called Health for the World. And I was like organizing all the lectures, the virtual lectures. I was like having constant meetings with the main attending and all our team, and I helped like send the newsletter. I was very involved, and diversity committee, we just like had a monthly events, and we met together like every now and then. It wasn't that time consuming, but
Now, visa situation, that's a question in a lot of IMG's minds. What type of visa are you in now, and like what are your future plans?
sure. I actually have visa questions myself that I eventually hope to find the answer. But from what I know, from what I've researched, there are basically two types of visa. If you need a visa to apply to a US, because some people are IMGs, but they are US citizens, just did their medical school in the Caribbean, for example. So there's a J1 visa and there's an H1B visa. And ideally, the best out of those is the H1B, because that's a work visa. And if you want to stay here after residency, it's an easier process. But very few programs have that available, because if they do have it available, they have to provide the cost for the lawyering and everything, and so that. And then there's the J1 visa, which is sponsored by something called ECFMG, which stands for Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates. So the programs don't have to worry about that kind of visa. So that's why most programs, sure. If you can get a J1, go for it, which pretty much anyone can. And I'm on a J1. The thing with the J1 is that if you want to stay here after residency, there are two options basically. You either have to go back to your country for 3 years and then come back, or you have to do something called J1 waiver, where basically you need to go to an underserved area that's eligible to give J1 waivers, so your options are limited.
So Jose, after kind of going through the entire application process, did you feel like there was one aspect of your CV and your interview that you felt was like really the strong reason why you got all the interviews you got and ultimately matched into a radiology residency?
If I had to choose just one thing, I don't know if this was subjective just because of the experience that I got from my interviews, but I'd say it was my research, just because every interview that I had, at least the programs that I was most interested in, always asked me about my research. All the interviewers seemed really interested in it, and I feel like that made a huge difference in my application.
Gotcha. And then was there a specific publication or presentation that was like the focus of your research portfolio?
I guess two of my projects. One of them was just like an imaging review that I don't know if it's because it was published in radiology, cardiothoracic imaging. Which,
that might be it.
But that seemed like a really good. Everyone asked me about it, and everyone seemed really interested in it. Gotcha. Yeah, and it was my first publication, so I felt like particularly proud about it.
So Jose, now that you made it to Penn, what do you think are the best / most enjoyable and the worst or the hardest parts of your residency experience thus far?
Okay, so I'm gonna start with the bad thing first.
All right.
radiology is really steep, like the learning curve. It's really hard. I feel like it's like restarting medicine all over, like medical school all over again, because you really don't get much exposure in radiology as a medical student. And you cannot get that until you're there and you're able to like start dictating. So it's really hard, but it's really rewarding. Like once you start nailing diagnoses and you start getting things right, it's awesome.
Yeah, dude, so that's what Vedant and I sort of talked about this in our first episode, where, you know, in our intern year or in other clinical clerkships or rotations, you know, so much of our work was bogged down by consults, writing lots of notes, lots of social work aspects of medicine, whereas the day-to-day life in radiology is so clinically focused, right? It makes it very, very enjoyable. Now, once you finish residency, do you have any specific career interests that you'd like to pursue? Maybe even a specific type of fellowship that you're thinking about. If you don't know, you know, that's okay.
I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm following what my mentors have told me to keep an open mind. I can just say that so far I've liked body, I like MSK, I like neuro, and we'll see.
That's good, man. So before we end our episode, do you have any final words of advice for the IMGs who are currently applying or will be applying to radiology or even residency in general?
Sure. I guess my main advice would be to try to have a very complete application. And I not just mean just have the requirements. Try to put everything that can ramp up your CV, like have good scores, but that's not just it, because nowadays application review is very holistic. So you need research, you need US clinical experience. Those three things I feel like are really important: good scores, research, US clinical experience, and then try to do anything that you're interested in. Extracurricular activity wise, if you're interested in global health, go for it. If you're interested in diversity, you can also join committees such as Women in Radiology, and all that helps your application, because radiologists and radiology programs want to create leaders in radiology, not just radiologists.
Yeah, I feel like talking to most of our classmates, that's what all of us sort of have in common. We have research, scores, academics, and then one other thing that kind of makes us unique / interesting. And it's really cool to learn what those unique aspects are from everyone. Started with you, man.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that I've really liked about Penn. I could tell that the faculty, the medical students, attendings, everyone was really diverse. And just look at our class, everyone's from everywhere. And I really like that.
Yeah, and everyone has different interests, but we all can come together and have a great time, kind of support each other along the way.
And I forgot to answer the good part of radiology residency. And that's going to sound, my answer is going to sound cliche, but I'm going to say the people. Like, truly, it's my coworkers, my classmates have become my friends, and it's just great to, after reading all day long, go and just grab a beer and like have Halloween costume parties, or like everyone is very different, but we all have a lot of things in common. And we're
I think
truly a family.
that's the best way to put it. I think everyone is different, but we all have this shared interest of supporting each other in common.
Yeah. I think, even from my end, like the interview process, like you said, it's so cliche, but at the end of the day, like a lot of programs are similar, right? Like you're kind of in the same area that you want to live in, and ultimately it just comes down to the people.
Yeah.
It's the people, man. It's like the most cliche thing you'll hear during interviews, but it turns out to be the truest thing. And there's just no way to sort of get the vastness of the importance until you experience it in residency, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Jose, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wonderful advice and your journey. We'll see you again in a very future episode, hopefully in a nicer set.
nicer set, better kind of technology. You know, Jose saw us kind of fumble around with the mics for like 20 minutes. So
No, thank you for having me, and I hope my advice to future IMG applicants help someone out.
Yep, absolutely. All right, guys. We'll see you next time for another episode of Clinically Correlate. Take care.